Okay, so welcome part 2 of the Levine study. Let's have a look at the different independent variables. What did they do? So in the dropped pen condition, they had to walk at a carefully practiced moderate pace, so 15 paces per 10 seconds. Experimenters walked towards a solitary pedestrian, so someone walking towards them in the opposite direction. And when 10 to 15 feet away from them, the experimenter reached into his pocket and accidentally, without appearing to notice, dropped a pen behind him in full view of the participant and continued walking past the participant. Total of 214 men, 210 women were approached over all the different countries. Participants were scored as having helped if they called back to the experimenter that he had dropped the pen and or picked up the pen and brought it to the experimenter. Okay, straightforward enough. For the hurt leg, walking with a heavy limp and wearing a large and clearly visible leg brace, experimenters accidentally dropped and unsuccessfully struggled to reach down for a pile of magazines as they came within 20 feet of passing the pedestrian. A total of 253 men and 240 women were approached. Helping was defined as offering to help and or beginning to help without offering. Okay. And helping the blind person cross the street. So there's a few more details to this one. Dressed in dark glasses, the experimenters, and carrying a white cane, acted as the role of the blind person needing help. The canes in the training were provided by the Fresno Friendship Center of the Blind. That's a nice little control to the research, that they're not just acting as they think a blind person might behave. That might mean that people can spot this isn't actually a blind person, but in this case they've done the research. Experimenters attempted to locate downtown corners with crosswalks, traffic signals, and moderate, steady pedestrian flow. They stepped up to the corner just before the light turned green, held out their cane, and waited until someone offered help. A trial was terminated after 60 seconds, or when the light turned red, whichever occurred first. So if no one had helped after 60 seconds, then they just stopped, or if the light turned red. After which the experimenter walked away from the corner. 281 trials, and they scored them as having helped if at a minimum they informed the experimenter that the light was green. Okay, so if they just went, you can go now, then that was regarded as helping. Okay, on to the findings. There's quite a lot of different findings to this, but boiled it down to a couple. So going to look at this in terms of the three aims. So for aim 1, first of all, is help stable across different helping situations. This is intercorrelations of helping measures. So this is correlating the overall helping index of the blind person against the drop pen and the blind person against the hurt leg. And this is across all of the different situations. So what they're trying to find out here is it stable? Is it predictable that if you get help as a blind person, you're going to get help as a hurt leg? So was there high levels of help for the blind and high levels for the hurt leg? Now, remember, for a correlation, the statistical output for a correlation is between 1 and -1. If you get a statistical output of -1 or 1, that means you've got a perfect negative correlation or a perfect positive correlation. Values that are close to 0 means no correlation. Okay, so in this case, do a little graph, a perfect positive correlation would look like that. Not quite like that, apologies, but that would have an output of 1. In this case, they've got values like 0.28. So it's not particularly close to 1, but it's kind of like that, I guess. So they've got a slight positive correlation. The drop pen is statistically significant at a p is less than 0.1 level. The other statistical significance here is this one as well, the drop pen against the hurt leg, and that's to a level of 0.05. These ones at the bottom here are when they collapse all three together, and they're not as meaningful as these three. These are the three that you really want to concentrate on. It's not particularly surprising that they've got quite high levels in this bottom one. Let's concentrate on these three. What this shows is although this one isn't statistically significant, because you can't see any minus figures in front of these, it means that all of these correlations are at least positive relationships, regardless of how significant or if they're significant. So the table one shows a modest degree of consistency across the three measures. So it was predictable that if you're in New York and someone helps you because you're a blind person, it's also predictable that the person who's doing the pen trial is also going to get help in New York. Okay. Now, two of the three correlations were statistically significant. Notice though that they do use this p is less than 0.1 level. Now, usually the minimum is p equals 0.05 for psychologists, but the researchers do state they use more liberal statistical significance level of 0.01. That means a 10% chance of error. There's a 10% chance that it wasn't significant because they had such small sample sizes. Okay, so n equals 23 in all cases. Right, so only 23 participants in each of these cities. Now, when you have a small sample size, it means you can justify having a lower statistical significance level, but it is worth bearing in mind for evaluation. They are being very liberal here, so they're not being very strict with their statistical significance. All relationships are in a positive direction, though. There's no negative relationships. There's no one. I would have predicted that the blind person would get lots of help, and in some countries or cities, perhaps dropping a pen, you'd get no help, in which case you'd see a negative relationship on some of them. But overall, they're all positive. So it is fairly stable across different helping situations. So they have found that it is relatively stable. So what does it mean in terms of a tweet size explanation of that? If you live in a city where people are likely to help a blind person, you're also likely to be helped if you drop a pen or are on crutches. If you live in a city that doesn't help people who drops a pen, you don't want to be blind either. Okay, so if you're getting very low levels of help in places, if you drop a pen, you're also going to get low level of help if you're blind. So it's a pretty stable predictor. Gender differences, there's no significant gender differences found. Okay, so that's a nice easy one. And why may this be different to Piliavin studies? Piliavin found that there was gender differences. Males helped far more. Well, Piliavin used someone who'd collapsed, and that's more risky for a female to help. More risky, especially in the drunk condition, what's going to happen to you, it's more unpredictable. Whereas someone dropping a pen, someone with a hurt leg, someone who's blind, is a far less risky situation, even though all the experimenters were male. Aim 2. Does helping strangers vary across cultures? Yes, it does. The most helpful cities or countries were Rio de Janeiro, San Jose, Lilongwe, which is in Malawi, and the least helpful cities, Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, New York, Singapore. Looking at that here, I've summarised this into the top 5. There's all 23, but I've collapsed it, ignoring the 6 to 18. There's the top 5, there's the bottom 5, and you can see the overall helping is quite marked difference. So Rio de Janeiro, 93% help, whereas in Kuala Lumpur and New York, 40 to 44% help. So huge differences in helping, and that's the key finding, I think, from this study. That's the one that stands out of all of the findings they look at. The others are correlational. They're a little bit weak correlations, but that's really striking. There are cross-cultural differences, and remember in that first aim, when they're talking about is it stable, there you can see how stable it is. In Brazil, you're getting consistent help in all three conditions, and in New York, you're getting quite low levels of helping, not particularly consistent there. The blind is still getting a lot more there, but in the other two conditions, fairly consistently low helping. And so it was a stable predictor in these different countries, but lots of differences there, which are very interesting. So there's a large range of cross-cultural differences in overall helping. Third aim, they're trying to narrow it down here. Why have we got those differences? That's what they're trying to question, why do those differences exist? Is there something about the different cultures or the community characteristics that make them less likely to help? So they're using correlational analyses for population size, economic well-being, cultural values, and walking speed. So what do they find? Well, I'll tell you straight out, the only one that actually makes a difference is the economic well-being. The others don't correlate statistically significantly. So let's have a look. Here's all the different stats breaks down. So these are the 4 variables. Population, purchasing power is the measure of economic wealth. Walking speed is the pace of life, and the individual collectivism is one of those individual characteristics, or is it a societal thing? And you can see here the only statistical significant ones are the asterisks there, so that again closer to 1 or -1, in this case negative correlations. So negative correlation between how much money a place has. For example, Rio de Janeiro, not particularly wealthy compared to New York, but there was high levels of helping. So there's a negative correlation there. The more rich that it was, the lower the level of helping. Shows that on average there were low correlations between community variables and helping measures. So there's hardly any significant correlations there. The only statistical reliable relationship was the economic productivity measure. Although statistically insignificant, there was a small relationship between the walking speed and overall helping, with participants in faster cities somewhat less likely to help. That's this one. And also for the individual collective one. Again, reasonable relationship, but it's still not statistically significant. So for both of those, there's a trend there, but there's not a statistical significance. More individualistic countries, so somewhat less helping. So for societies where you kind of think about number 1, which is kind of New York, there was less helping overall, but it wasn't statistically significant. No relationship between population size and helping. 2 community variables of economic productivity and individual, collective, and walking were intercorrelated. So faster places had strong economic productivity, and faster places were more individualistic. So there's that going on in the background. It's not particularly important, that, but it was an interesting thing. So this is regardless of helping. They just found, interestingly, that faster places had stronger economic productivity and faster places were more individualistic. For the Sympatia countries like Brazil, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Mexico, Spain, on average they were more helpful than non-Sympatia, suggesting that Sympatia countries encourage a culture of being nice, agreeable, good-natured. They might result in an increased likelihood to help strangers. So, does economic wealth determine pace and therefore determine helping? Well, due to the fact that similar fast-paced cities had different levels of helping, this is Milgram's theory, that system overload theory. It doesn't explain why economically wealthy cities helped less, because there were some fast-paced cities that did have high levels of helping, whereas some didn't have low levels of helping. So that thing about Times Square and the naked cowboy and the naked cowgirl doesn't seem to ring true. It doesn't explain why economic wealth negatively correlated. It'd be easy to say, well, rich countries have got faster pace and so you get less helping, but that wasn't true, because different fast-paced cities were also helping. So it's not because of a faster-paced life, it must be some other cultural or individual variable that's related to economic wealth. Okay, conclusions. Helping of strangers is a cross-culturally meaningful characteristic of helping of the place. There's large cross-cultural variations in helping. Helping across cultures inversely related to economic productivity. Countries with cultural tradition of Sympatia are on average more helpful, and although faster cities tend to be less helpful than slower cities, the link between economic health is not a byproduct of those fast-paced life, and the value of collective and individual is unrelated to helping behaviours. Now, for each of those conclusions, what I recommend you do, because I have explained each of those throughout those findings and results graphs, take each one of those and go back and find a result that shows each of those conclusions, and that'll clarify it in your head. Thanks for listening.